Dr. McKnight.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, late morning, early afternoon. I'm kind of shifting over to, my job today is to talk about integrating technology in teaching and learning in K-12. And your job is to think about how that applies to higher ed and to pre and in-service training and instruction. So there's been a lot of research in K-12 about effective integration of technology into learning. And recently, the OECD released a report in 2015 that found that, in general, the findings are mixed in terms of the effectiveness of using technology in education. We were talking about that earlier this morning. There's cases of brilliance, and then there's cases of where it's not doing so well. And what the report concluded is that when you are marrying the newest, shiniest technology with old school teaching, you're not going to get what you're hoping for. And there is a good message here, though, that solid pedagogy that's aligned with how humans learn, integrated with technology, can do the job. It can meet that hope for what we're calling transformation in teaching and learning. All right. So what does that 21st century teaching look like? George talked a lot about it today, earlier today, and we had a lot of conversation about effective teaching practices. And they're essentially, when we talk about teaching in learning science, the most effective way to work with learners and help them to learn is a learner-centered and active learning approach, as opposed to a teacher-centered sit-and-get approach. So I'm going to talk about a few of the key features of a learner-centered active learning approach, and these were shared in a 1997 report by the American Psychological Association. So one of them is that as an instructor and educator, we want to develop tasks that are optimally challenged for that learner, and it's relevant to their personal interests. You may know of this as personalized learning. A key term that's thrown around in K-12 is zone of proximal development. And what that ZPD is targeting learning materials that are aimed enough to challenge you, but not so challenging that you give up, and not so low in challenge that you're bored out of your mind and you give up. Try to do that with 25 to 100 students in your classroom. This sort of personalized learning at the zone of proximal development is, I would just say, impossible to do without technology. Another one is that you enable personal choice and control of the learner. So you as the teacher are not selecting what you as the learners need to know. You are facilitating, helping them to find this inquiry-driven approach to learning. You're supporting them, the learners, in what they want to know that's aligned to what they care about, what's relevant to them. It's also very important to use multiple pathways. We talked earlier today about, talk about 20th century teaching, a textbook, teaching out of a textbook. I don't know if you've heard this language. I remember when I was teaching at the university level, teachers would constantly say, I covered it, they should know it. Covering is not teaching. So the idea here of multiple pathways is just using lots of different sources of information and ways of learning to engage learners. We also need to enable students, they have to be responsible for their own learning. In a situation where it's sit and get, the philosophy underlying that is the teacher is the holder of knowledge, they're the knowledgeable one, you sit, and as an empty vessel, you absorb what I'm telling you. And that doesn't align with how humans learn. So what the role of a learner-centered active learning approach is that the learner is taking responsibility. They're driving the inquiry. They have the questions that interest them. And then as a 21st century skill, I don't know why this is a 21st century skill, humans are social beings, so collaborative anything, including teaching and learning, is important. And learning is a social enterprise. So teaching and helping students to learn in a collaborative environment where the learning is collaborative is key to this. So I want to talk about a study that we did in 7 districts that were known for pushing the envelope in terms of integrating technology into learning. We did it in conjunction with Digital Promise, and this was when I was at Pearson Education a couple of years ago when I did this study. And what we did was we went into these schools, we observed classrooms, we had focus groups with teachers, we talked with the students, we reviewed lesson plans, to see how are teachers leveraging technology to enhance learning. And over here on the left side are 5 general domains that we found, none of them which will surprise you. And we made the connection between these uses of technology and learning science. How does doing it this way help learners to learn? So one of the first domains that we found is improved access. And that word access is kind of loaded. The first type of access I want to talk about is just access to a wider variety of information. And that is critical because we still use textbooks in K-12 and in higher ed. And there's so much better stuff out there. In fact, when I worked at Pearson, our problem was we had to align every textbook with the learning standards in that state. And by the time we got it out in paper, by the time it was out in paper, what we had in there was already, last year's news, especially in the STEM fields. So access to a wide array of information and much richer and deeper array of information. You saw a video for how the Khan Academy created some cool stuff for the field of medicine. Khan Academy has some great videos teaching students about science and math, and teachers are starting to leverage that. The other piece of access that's really important is for struggling learners. Struggling learners could be people who are blind, who are deaf, who have learning disabilities, or you're just not a good reader yet. You're struggling with the mechanics of reading, so everything at grade level for you is not accessible. You can't read that science text that you're supposed to read. You can't keep up with math because there's reading involved in math. So there's great technology out there, such as immersive readers, that kids can just plug in and have text read to them. And they're at grade level in terms of comprehension. They're just struggling with reading mechanics, for example. This is a key area where technology is super helpful. There's great research on how immediate feedback is critical for learners. When you find out as you're learning something that what you're thinking is correct is actually wrong, if you find that out right away, you don't have time to build up a misconception that you carry forward with you for sometimes years. Getting immediate feedback from technology through quizzes, through formative assessment, and even just learning tasks with feedback built in is critical. The other aspect of technology related to communication is just that teachers can constantly communicate with students. Students can communicate with each other and with students around the globe and with experts around the globe. And we're finding that our rural schools, for example, are taking advantage of that. They don't have a calculus teacher, but they can beam one in. This is not a earth-shattering finding. However, teachers are using technology to create efficiencies. They can keep track of where students are in their homework. They can keep track of who's been absent. They can give more immediate feedback. And what that does is it frees up time for focusing on planning, especially for integrating integrating technology into instruction, and for instructional time in the classroom. And there's great research on the proportion of time used in the classroom on instruction is one of the best predictors, assuming the instruction is good, is one of the best predictors of learning. So to the extent you can free up time for instruction, that's critical. This one was a really interesting finding. Teachers are using technology to extend the audience and the relevance and authenticity of the learning tasks. When you have paper and pencil worksheets to do, for example, what is that telling a kid about math and how important math is in just learning how to think computationally, for example? That isn't an authentic learning task, really. Sometimes you need it, you know, we call it drill and kill. Sometimes you need to learn some specific skills. But once you've got them, giving kids worksheets really is not a very effective way for people to learn. When you can use technology to share what you're doing, to create new work tasks, like one of the great examples we saw were middle school kids posting blogs. And they were sharing it around the world, and they saw that people in Africa were reading their blog. And it got them super excited about it, and then they started thinking, I better check my spelling and my grammar, and I better care about what I'm trying to tell people here. So it created this responsibility and ownership and engagement, and that's what we want with learning. That is critical for learning. That's foundational for learning. And then this one is related to a comment Katherine made when she was online with us about the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side role of an instructor. This is where this value add of a high quality education can be seen. When we go with a teacher-centered approach, where the teacher is the owner of knowledge and you sit and you get from that teacher, there's not a whole lot of learning going on. It's not optimal. When you are the guide on the side, when the learner is driving the learning and engaged in the learning, it's their own inquiry process, that discovery learning that George was talking about, and you're guiding them through this, this is a new role for teachers, and a lot of them told us they were super uncomfortable with it. They don't like not knowing. They don't like the students knowing something they don't know. But this guide on the side, you can say, hey, I don't know, how do we figure that out? And you work with the students to teach them how to learn. So that's a key shift that technology is really good at enhancing. Somebody, Christoph, I think you were talking about blended learning, right? The flipped learning model. In one of the schools that adopted the flipped learning model, the teachers were saying, I'm not standing up in front of the classroom lecturing anymore. I'm circulating around the classroom, and now the kids are asking me questions because I'm standing next to them. And now I'm guiding them through their learning process. So that shift in roles for teachers and learners is where I think technology can be the biggest game changer. So to wrap this up, the lesson learned from K-12, and I heard it from George talking about it with higher ed, and this is true in pre and in-service professional teaching and learning, is that the technology isn't going to do the job for you. You have to marry it with solid, good pedagogy that's aligned with how students learn. Thank you.